for being here. This is a really amazing thing, and I have to tell you that a lot of you are writers that are in the audience as well, and this doesn't happen very often in a writer's life, where you even publish a book to begin with, but then have all of these folks come and celebrate it. So I really am very appreciative of this. It's a wonderful mix of my family. My mom's here, my wife and son are here, my aunt and uncle are here, favorite aunt is here. I've got students from generations that are here, like really long time ago, not as long ago, and then now as well. And that's extremely flattering, which is amazing. I've got wonderful colleagues that are here. I don't want to embarrass you, but I'd ask if Kelly McLean could come up for a second, just for a second.
Favorite colleague.
Because Kelly did the cover work for Permanent for Now.
Oh, wow.
Which is, I think, the best part of the book. So I really, very, very, very grateful for Kelly for doing that for me and for being such a good friend over the years. Thank you. So thank you, and I obviously, wow, it's so good to see you. I want to thank Christine and Alex at this wonderful bookstore for allowing us to be here. This is an amazing bookstore, and I'm so glad to see like Philadelphia having indie bookstores. You know, when everybody said there's no such thing as indie bookstores anymore, and lo and behold, right? So it's wonderful, and thank you. I really appreciate being here. So I'm going to read, because that's obligatory, but I don't like reading prose in public, so I time myself, and it's going to be less than 15 minutes, if that's cool. You have enough patience to handle that? I typically don't at a reading, but I appreciate you listening anyway, and there are plenty of copies, etc. I'll do signings and hugs and all that stuff. If you don't mind, though, before I actually read, I wanted to talk a little bit, just a tiny bit, of sort of the inspiration of the book, like the background of it, like where it came from. So when I was in high school, like a really long time ago, I took a military history class, and in that class, the teacher was sort of crew-cut gym teacher, macho guy, and he was teaching in a way that I don't believe in now, in terms of like being a teacher, and he was telling us a lot of like what history was, instead of interpreting it. And one of the things he was talking about was like, you know, he very sternly pointed at us in the audience and said, the class, and said, you know, you're really lucky that we're not speaking German right now, right? Because we had won World War II, essentially. That was his argument. And I was like, well, we're speaking English, which is also a foreign language as well. It comes from England, right? I didn't say that. I mean, I was like a little punk kid, but I didn't say that directly to him. I was kind of confused by his rationale. But that kind of got me started on this notion of history and how we interpret it. And when I got older and I started thinking about literature and writing, you know, I've written in the past, but one of the things that's always perturbed me and has been something that I've lost sleep on for a lot of years was not just Nazi Germany for what it was, right, which we all understand to be this human tragedy, etc., but what it meant for that spirit to be inside of humans. So in other words, I'm a human, and the people that perpetrated the tragedy of the Holocaust are humans. We're humans. They're not monsters. They're not some evil aliens. They're people. And it scares me to this day to think that as a person, I have that potentiality inside of myself as well. We all do, right? And I've always wondered, I've always questioned, like, what is it about good people that make them good, perspective, right? And bad people that make them bad? And what are the things that go into developing that persona? Right? What keeps me from doing to others what the Nazis did to the Jews during the Holocaust? Does that make sense, guys? Mm-hmm. And so like that's kind of like what I've always wrestled with, like that my morality is circumstance, that what makes me potentially good is no part of me any different than what could make me evil with circumstance or history or whatever. And it scared me to think that that was possible. So I wrestled with that. The book, in a large way, is the result of me thinking about that for a long time. And I didn't want to write, and this is, if you guys read the interview in Chestnut Hill Local, I didn't want to write a Holocaust novel. I had no interest in studying the Holocaust, even though I am ethnically Jewish. I had no interest in writing about that or diving into that. But when you're talking about sort of the evilness inside of humanity, I couldn't think of a more appropriate setting and topic. And so it kind of dictated to me that I was going to write about it, you know, because of the subject matter. So for better or for worse, and success or failure, this is the result of me pondering and wrestling with that reality that like the evilness inside of these men is in me somewhere as well as in all of us. And so I tried to think of a way out of that, right? And this is what happened. So I'm going to read as briefly as I can, and then if anybody has a copy and wants me to sign it, I'm happy to do so. And then I guess we'll be done. So I'm going to read a couple sections. The first section I'm going to read is chapter 2. I'll read chapter 1 really quick too. Chapter 1 just says he died. It's the only thing that chapter 1 says. And I asked the publisher, and they agreed to allow for a bunch of blank pages after that, because I really wanted that phrase to resound, right, before we get into the next section. So I'm going to read the immediate section after that, chapter 2. And a lot of you have read this or heard this before, because this book was written 10 years ago originally. And so whenever I read this chapter, and then I'll read something new. Okay, so this is the second chapter, permanent for now. The water pressure is low and the walls are thin, so I can hear the cocks crowing a block away at the Vietnamese butchery. Though it is morning, it is not yet dawn. The cocks project their penetrating voices all day, as if, on display, are cleavers destined for their necks, swinging pendulums from nails. They shout their pious pleas for freedom through the bars of their world and out into the sky. I wash my bald knuckles, the hairs seared and curled upon themselves after being scorched by the burners on my stove. I wash my bald head, my fragile body. It moves slowly, my body, to wash itself. I am careful of slipping. The lather circles a buzzard over the partly clogged drain and lubricates the floor of the stall. If I slip, it could be the last thing I do. The first thing Lombard South said to me was, "You're a survivor." And he said it with such excitement that for a moment I felt it too. Excitement. Now, all I smell is my burnt knuckle hair, and all I hear are cocks, and all I am is fragile. I breathe. For this, I am grateful, and I am ashamed. My alarm clock this morning was set at 6 because it was set at 6 the day before. It will be set at 6 tomorrow. Every morning I watch it until it goes off, never leaving the bed until it does, until it calls me to my feet. I lie there, regardless of when I wake up, and watch the analog hands spin until they are spread at their furthest distance, their most impossible clap, and a bell tells me to rise. I am used to commands. It sometimes takes me a half an hour, rising. I remember being a boy, alive at the pistol shot of a cock's crow, up and out and everywhere. There wasn't enough in the world for me to ignore any part of it, so I woke up running. This many years later, I open my eyes and think again, my body has shrunk. It is leaving me, this body, day after day, until it will be gone and I will be without it. I think of myself separate from it. There is a body of a man, old and fragile and shrinking, and there is me, inside, trapped, a cock in a cage, howling silently to be a boy, intrigued enough by the world to remain ignorant of it. That's my boy. This morning, as every other, I could not squeeze the cold from my fingers, so I held them hovering above the burner while staring at the blank wall behind the stove. I remembered to forget, but loud sounds in my memory calls me to take quick inward breaths in succession, all ins and no outs, small and forceful like sniffs of fractionally fragrant flowers, but through the mouth, filling my lungs until they might have burst. Loud sounds in memory, and I exhaled, breathed in through my nose, and then smelled the singe of knuckle hair that hovered with my hands a little too close to the flame. All bodies are ultimately frail. It has taken a while, a slow, careful, considerate time, but I am clean. For a moment, I let the water slap at me. I hold the Brillo pad against the stream of water, allowing it to spray in chaotic directions. The metal wires reflect the peach light from the bathroom's solitary bulb, dimmed by dead flies in the fixture, and I bring it to my arm. They are not mine. The numbers. I don't want them. Lombard South said to me without provocation, without introduction, "You're a survivor." And his excitement was contagious, but only momentarily. I didn't know what he meant at first by calling me that. He just said it. So I looked at him like he was the crazy man, like he was the old man carrying a grocery bag of only a few things because any more and the weight would be too much to bear on the walk home. Like he was the one who should have worn a long-sleeve shirt that day, as he should have every day. Catching my confusion, South nodded his forehead at my left arm, between the wrist and elbow. Okay, catching my confusion, South nodded his forehead at my left arm, between the wrist and elbow, gray for the world to see, numbers. And I turned them from him, the numbers that aren't mine, pulling my arm from his view, and I shook my head. I've survived nothing. I work the Brillo pad back and forth slowly at first, until the friction numbs the surface of my skin. One thing I've learned, one truth, is that after a specific amount of pain, you begin to feel nothing. After the initial shock, there's just nothing there. So when I feel nothing, at the exact moment when there's nothing there, I push hard and rub quickly, scratching and digging deep. I try to take away what were never mine, numbers, a gift unasked for. Tiny dribbles of blood find the shower floor and disperse, rose pink to clear, gone with the water. I stop, and they're there, raw skin above, but sunk still and shadowy. They will always be there, gray signals of survival, though I've survived nothing. I turn off the shower and hope I do not slip getting out. Remarkably, I still want to cling to life. This is what I want for myself when I die. My body cremated, and portions of my feathery ash distributed to my dearest dear friends, so they can disperse me alone and in secret at the places they remember us most fondly. Golden urns clasped in the shaking hands of my closest companions who, after eulogy and tears, rub me into the ground at their feet at the place where we met or the place we enjoyed or the place where we said goodbye. I want to be all over the world the way I woke up dreaming to be as a boy. What is true is that I do not have those dearest dear friends. So my ashes will flutter as feathers dropped from birds unexpectedly freed to unmarked ground, harboring no memories of me. So that's depressing.
Yeah.
Sorry. My wife tells me my literature is very depressing. And it's true, it is. I apologize for that. But again, like the subject, forgive me, I'm hot. The subject matter is such, and I don't know how to write about it otherwise. So let me just read another section. So that was obviously the main character. He's an old man, and he's a Holocaust survivor. And the entire book is sort of centered around his story and how he kind of becomes, he comes to grips sort of with his role in this history. And I also use the term Holocaust survivor very loosely. So this next section, I wanted to read this chapter because it really addresses the title, Permanent for Now, and that sort of oxymoron. And what you're going to hear in the section is true, and that is that in some of the camps, the Nazi soldiers actually referred to some of the prisoners as permanent. They were the prisoners who were not executed upon arrival. And I thought it was sort of really interesting in my research finding that they would use that terminology as permanent to this group of people, and it's sort of a violent sort of mistake of language. So that's where the oxymoron of the title comes from, and hopefully this little section, which does take place partially in a camp, is really aimed at describing. Let me read that really quickly. There were two types of prisoners who entered the camp, the doomed and the permanent. What always struck me was the way the tracks entered the gates from the outside and ran the length of the camp until the entire train fit just perfectly and the tracks just stopped. It was engineered that way, perfectly. The end of the line, no switch, no detour. Trains go as far as their tracks, and when the tracks end, so too does the journey. Departing the train, two distinct lines formed as passengers were sifted and sorted by ranking officers and doctors who would briefly examine each person and point either left or right. Little was ever said. Most often, it was a minute gesture of the head, this way or that way, and the new arrivals would corral into their respective lines, stealing glances at the other line and wondering which was the lucky, theirs or ours. Both lines went to the showers. If you were of the line that went to a shower on the left, your last glimpse of daylight would be the moment before you entered, an almost always very bright sun that caught your eye just before the door jamb shaded it forever. If you were sent to the shower on the right, you were permanent. I still remember how the prisoners were called permanent, as if they would always be there, as if they were fixtures, statues of stone, 400 men to a bunker, completely and totally and always there. I suppose I am permanently there too, for now at least. Maybe it was a way of keeping them hopeful. If they felt permanent, perhaps they would resist nothing, in the hope that their docility would reap survival. Maybe it was a sick twist of language to call something with a truncated timeline static. Maybe it was for contradiction's sake, for nothing, no one is truly ever permanent. Maybe it was literal. They may have been expected to stay and work for the rest of their lives. Or maybe it was simply true, in the ashes fertilizing the ground, permanently there. I am here, but I am also there. Lombard South wouldn't understand this, so I don't even mention it to him. He's a practical man, incapable of reconciling how a man can be in more than one place at the same time, but a man can be. It's as if I walked out of a sculpture of myself, lifelike and limestone, standing in stride and kept on, that copy of me, forever and always there, permanently. And every once in a while, I'll feel a breeze that no one else does, and it'll shiver me in a place that's not my body. It'll take my breath when it leaves. It'll carry on its back a smoky smell similar to the kind coming from barbecue restaurants that pump their aromas temptingly onto the sidewalk. But this smoky scent does not cause salivation. It will reek of false salvation, of people dissipated into the air. The breeze will swirl around me, through me, and for a second, I'll stop dead in my tracks and breathe in deep through my nose to smell the smoke that becomes a film on the back of my tongue where the buds are the most bitter. And I'll know that breeze is blowing where I am, other than here. The book isn't ultimately depressing. Some people will say that it is, but honestly, I tried to think of how this book could be redemptive as well. The central image in the book is the Frauenkirche, which is a church in Dresden, Germany, that exists in the book. During World War II, it was destroyed by the United States and British Air Forces in an incendiary attack on Dresden, Germany. And in 2002, it was rebuilt using the exact same stones that stayed as rubble since World War II around the spot. They actually had like mathematicians and architects come together, get all those stones and rebuild the same exact church in the same exact spot using new materials as well. But to me, that was a symbol. I thought that was a really beautiful symbol of mankind. You build this beautiful church, you destroy this beautiful church, you rebuild this beautiful church. So in a lot of ways, the book follows a very similar structure. The beauty of humanity, the destruction of humanity, and then the rebuilding of it. So there is a redemptive quality to the book, hopefully. I wouldn't say that works for my characters necessarily, but it certainly is meant to be for the reader to understand that we have that potentiality on both sides of the spectrum. If you don't mind, I want to read just a small final chapter because it's not depressing, and I didn't want to leave everyone with a really depressing thing to walk out into the cold night. So let me just read a quasi-depressing chapter, a little less depressing than the other ones, to kind of end our reading. So this is the last I'll read. Same character by and by. One truth I know is that most assume elderly people's minds are as feeble as their bodies. That assumption is wrong. The mind that is in me has the same memories of my younger years. It harbors all of the ships of my latent dreams, no matter the stasis of their sails. The shell around the mind slowed, that is all. And that look you see in the eyes of the elderly is not the vacuous loss of mental faculty. It is the calm acceptance of the consolidation of all things they've witnessed, collated into the one resource, a mind at the end of life. And with the body failing so considerably, the mind is forced to oscillate like a ribbon tied to the end of a stick, up and down in the dry waves of forced remembrance. Today, when my alarm clock shouts, I rise from my bed. I walk slowly into the kitchen and sit down at the small table that lifts on a hinge up from the wall. Beyond my window, it is again a day at which to marvel. South told me to hold tight, that we had a pretty serious storm coming, the residual of some hurricane that hit the Carolinas pretty hard. As predicted, the sky promises a threat, but it is before the storm. A bright sun shines behind a layer of enormous clouds that blanket the city, a wool cap on a bulb. The sky must be so bright beyond because the fringes of the clouds are transparent and I can see the deep, dark centers of rainwater waiting malevolently. South promised to come over this morning early for breakfast, but his early is not as early as mine. He'll be here in an hour or two. I think South is just as lonely as I am, feels just as undeserving as redemption. Who, though, has the power, the purity, to boldly declare where forgiveness is appropriate? In the year that I've known him, he talks as much about his family in Philadelphia as he insinuates wishing to hear my story. It's like a distant nirvana, Philadelphia, a place I've never been, a place he refers to as a shithole paradise. I want to ask him why he left. I want to ask him why he doesn't go back. But then I think of my own story, the one I don't want to tell, and I think that South must have one as well. A story, a hidden story, lost as a tome in the back of a bookshelf, behind the classics and the beach read throwaways, invisible to visitors but thumping like the telltale heart. There are times when I want to be honest with South. We live in the same building, so it's as if nothing I say could ever get out. It would travel between our apartments and stall at the front door. I want to let South know the truth about what happened to me back then because I've never had anyone to tell, and withholding it has been a lump in my throat, making it difficult to swallow and breathe. As kind as he's been to me, I feel he deserves to know about the day gray numbers were sunk into my arm, everything that happened before and everything that happened after. Sometimes I feel like telling my story to South would be like lancing a blister, opening up the pressure of a vacuum, quelling a baby's crying, making me human again by connecting me with another human. Because that's one thing the camp took away from me, my humanity. Not my faith in it, but my humanity itself. South could be that one person to hear my story and to confirm it by listening. People with bad memories always have to be honest. Others will remember what they say even when they do not. My memory is too perfect, so I shroud my truth in silence. I imagine it, him and me, 6 beers and a candle because too much light hurts my eyes, and my long, long conversation, his nodding, and it being all over. I am human again, and South gets what he wanted, my story. And the sun sets, and the lights of the city come on, and everything is possible once again. But this is something I will never do, because I am a coward. South will petition in not so many words, but like his secrets, mine will be mine. They will be on the verge of being told on my tongue, but they will remain mine. If you hold something to yourself long enough, it becomes part of you. I knew this when, walking from the market one Sunday, I noticed a tree that had a Gothic iron cage placed around it as a sapling. As it grew into the massive tree it is today, the trunk exceeded the boundaries of the iron, and instead of snapping around it, it consumed the cage. I walked by that one Sunday, stopped to rest, and admired the thick tree with iron spears protruding out of it, not from a wound, but from a communal place of connection. I have likewise absorbed my cage. It protrudes from me, and though it is invisible, I am impaled. South called me a survivor, but I am not. Living is not the same as surviving. And I am alive, but I do not survive. I escaped, a fortune I pay for. I do not hear South come in. I continue to stare out my window, and he fingers white chipping paint from my kitchen's door jamb. Some of it flutters to the floor like ash and rests fragmented. See, like I told you, right? Big ass storm out there, yeah? We always get bumped to first class on the shortest flights. I turn around slowly, and there is my friend. Thank you.